Welcome. Thank you all for being here. We know that you are all busy people. There are probably many other places that you could be this morning, but you chose to be here, and that is a testament to your willingness to serve your CCSD students. So thank you for being here. We're actually going to start the morning with a pop quiz. You all have a manual in front of you. On the back, there's some space for notes, so you can, or if you have something else to write on, go ahead and use that as well. But what I want you to do is take a minute to think. Don't start writing yet. I want you to think about when your service to Charleston County School District, in service to Charleston County School District, what is the impact that you would like to have made on students? So what impact would you like for Charleston County School District to have on students? And once you've thought about this, you are going to write that down in 10 words or less. And this centers around the reason that school systems exist. 10 words or less. Good morning. We're just getting started with a little pop quiz. You can use it, use the back. It's really not a quiz, but we just like to call it that. Being reflective about what impact you would like the school system to have on its students, and the centers around why school systems exist. 10 words or less. Why do we have Charleston County School District? All right, looks like we're wrapping up here. Who will be the first to share your 10 words? Why do we have Charleston County School District?
And I even needed like a hyphenated word to kind of like get it
All
all.
right, all right, we'll allow it.
Every student is well prepared for life's next steps.
Every student is well prepared for life's next steps. Thank you, Sarah. Who will go next? Eric.
I have create capable citizens to lead in a changing, challenging world.
Create capable citizens to lead in a changing, challenging world. Thank you. Who will go next? Jen?
Provide excellent academic and social education leading to lifelong learners.
Providing excellent academic and social education to lead to lifelong learners. Thank you.
Okay, mine's pretty simple. Whole child outcomes.
Whole child outcomes. Can you say more about that? We'll give you just a few more words.
I get a few more words.
Yeah. Since you only used 3.
That's right, succinct. I think that's why I just put it in 3 words.
Okay.
A whole human ready for the world.
A whole human ready for the world. Yeah, thank you. Carol.
Okay, I wrote down, all students have the best learning and teaching experiences.
All students have the best teaching and learning experiences.
For their future.
For their future.
Take off 3 words.
You took off 3 words. Okay, thank you.
Protect, keep, and expand on what we know works.
Protect, keep, and expand on what we know works. That's the impact. That's why Charleston County School District exists. Thank you.
Okay, to help prepare our kids for the future.
To help prepare our kids for the future. And I can't see your name tag. Your name is,
Oh, I'm
I
so
want to be,
sorry.
that's okay.
Thomas Ravenel.
Hi, Thomas. Thank you. Thank you all for sharing. Why is it that no one said to make sure that we have the right color of cheerleading uniforms, or that we have a football stadium, the best football stadium in the state, or that we have the best library in such and such school? Why is it that no one wrote that as their 10 words?
Did you ask us for the end goal?
I asked you for the end goal.
Right, you're talking about things that are very temporary in one point in time, and it seems like all our answers were very forward-thinking and future-looking.
Yeah, so those are temporary, one point in time things, and you were thinking, I asked you to think future forward. Thank you. Who else? Why didn't any of you have those as answers?
I think those, I think somebody pretty much said, for me, those are not, it's not important to me that we have football stadium, that we have these things. What's important is that we have a system, that we have schools that's equipped to prepare kids for the future.
Yeah, those things aren't important to you. It's
Right.
important that we have schools that equip our children for the future. Yeah, why is it that school systems exist in the first place? Why do we have our school systems?
To create productive members in our society.
To create productive members in our society. Yeah, Jen.
An educated population is a healthier.
An educated population is
It's a
healthier?
healthier population.
Is a healthier population. Yeah, anyone else?
Well, as we work together as a community, a system, then we can meet the needs of our community. So it takes some kind of organization to help that happen in our communities.
Yeah, so as we work together as a community and to make that happen through some sort of organization, that's for our kids to have the future that you mentioned in your 10 words minus 3. Yeah, school systems exist for one reason and one reason only, and that is to improve student outcomes. They don't exist to have a balanced budget. They don't exist to have great facilities, great football stadiums, the right colored uniforms. They don't even exist to employ our people around the county. Those are very important things, having great teachers is a very, very important thing for a school system, but that is not the reason that school systems exist. Those are means toward that end of improving student outcomes. So then the next question becomes, in a community so large and when there are so many different student outcomes that are possible, how do we know which outcomes to pursue? Anybody have any
I
idea?
think those outcomes are determined by what our community needs are. And so that ranges from business to our healthcare system, to our schools, to our higher education. So it encompasses everything from the arts to science to engineering, math. Those are sort of the driving factors behind what we do in schools.
Yeah, so addressing community needs and that community context around. So that's how we know which outcomes are needed, which outcomes should be pursued. Okay, thank you. Who else?
I'm confused, I'm totally confused, because you're saying improve student outcomes. What's the basis of your, when are you starting that we're not at a level of acceptability? You're trying, 17 15 years, our proficiency rate's been the same flat rate. Are you going at that point, saying we're improving from that point on? I mean, what is the basis? Where are you starting?
Yeah, so
I
what,
know when I came out of school,
Mhm.
the basis was you can learn how to master simple math. Everybody learned how to read, everything.
Thank you.
So where are you starting at?
we'll
That's
get
what I'm
there.
missing.
Well, we have 3 hours to get there. So,
you can go improve. I'm like,
yeah, that's why they exist, right? To improve student outcomes. And you make a valid point. Our student outcomes improving, but we'll get to all that as we move through our time together. And if we don't, you can ask that again for sure.
Well, I think that when you ask about, what students should know and what we should work on improving, and part of that also comes from our adult experiences in terms of what was valuable for us as learners in school, and what knowledge and skills do we use in the jobs that we have over time. So I know as someone, when I count back how many experiences, I've had to change my career in some fashion many, many times. So looking back at what did I learn in school that helped me adapt and, have a career and have a job. I, at one point, started a business. How did I know how to do that? Because I had a lot of skills that I had learned in school that allowed me to create something that I had never created before.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of reflection on what really matters when you look back, what really matters, that we make sure that our children have those experiences in school so that they can function and adapt and change as adults.
So looking at my own experience and what helped me be adaptable, and my past experience and my experiences forward helped me to know what outcomes should be pursued. Is
And
that?
talk to others too,
And
because
talking to
what
others.
was valuable for me may not have been of value,
Yeah,
to
talking to others. Yeah. Okay. Sarah?
Well, I was thinking, when you ask, how do we know which outcomes to pursue, and you mentioned how geographically large our school district is, McClellanville to Edisto, North Charleston, and so I think it's important to point out that we have a very unique governance structure here in Charleston County. We have a big county board, we have 8 constituent boards that have different duties, and it's unfortunate that our constituent boards are not utilized. They are basically volunteers, and we have 50 volunteers working, and so to use those boards as a way to get the input, because we have rural areas, suburban, urban areas, and so to use those constituent boards along with board members going out kind of like they have in the last week, that is that's just a huge plus. They're already there. Let's not belittle them, but let's use them, and because we need to get that input in District 1 in McClellanville, Illinois. We need to get that input in North Charleston and use those constituent boards to bring it down here to 75 Calhoun. So then,
So who's the we?
the county board needs to have a better relationship with the 8 boards. It's this huge community input gathering system ready for, and it's not being used that way, unfortunately. So that's one big thing I hope everyone realizes. I know you do, because she has a family member on a constituent
Well,
board.
and I've been on a constituent board,
Right.
so I know the impact constituent boards can have on student outcomes, because our own board was instrumental in really addressing the fact that we had overage students in elementary school who were getting so frustrated and they became discipline problems. The same thing was happening in middle school, so we finally figured out how we could get the overage children into places where they could learn and have some self-esteem and hope. They had hope. and
Thank
that
you.
was instrumental. And
Okay.
that came out of the constituent boards seeing all these discipline problems that were occurring, and it was a way to think about it critically and
Okay.
come up with a solution.
Thank you. Who else? How do we know, Jen?
So you said what outcomes to pursue.
Yeah.
I think, like you were saying, was the needs of the community, but I think it's also what the community values. So, which sometimes are different than their
Yeah.
needs.
Yeah, so I think what Sarah was getting at, and kind of what all of you have been speaking to, is, and Sarah, you talked about the "we" being the county board. So that's where the Board of Trustees comes in. The county selects through election 9 members to a board to represent that vision, to represent, and and as you mentioned, and as you have all mentioned, you have a very large, geographically diverse school district, and there are a lot of things, a lot of people who have a lot of different ideas. So that is why we have a school board, why we have a board of trustees to represent those communities and the community as a whole in order to distill from what you all hear, what that vision and what those outcomes that the district will pursue will be. So, school district exists to improve student outcomes. School board exists to represent the vision and the values of the community. And we'll get into a little bit more specificity about how those vision and values are represented. But first, I want to, and those two are foundational principles that we will be coming back to throughout. School district exists for one reason only, to improve student outcomes, and school board exists to represent the vision and the values of the community. So, any questions so far?
I have a big one, because I get this a lot from parents and even teachers. What do you mean by student outcomes? Because people want to make sure you don't mean SC ready scores
Yep.
only. What are student outcomes?
Yep, and we are going to get there. Yep, and we're going to get there very soon, and very, we'll spend some time on that.
Great, thanks.
You bet. Okay, so now we're going to do a second part of our quiz. And this question is going to have, so it'll be 2A, 2B, 2C. So you'll have 3 answers for this question, and you're going to be tempted to write more than 3 possibly, but you get 3. If you had to identify the 3 most important behaviors that a school board can engage in that have the most impact on improving student outcomes, what would those 3 behaviors be? 3 things that a school board can engage in that set the context for improving student outcomes. What are those 3 things? Also, while you're writing those 3 things down, I want you to be thinking about, where did I get this knowledge from? How do I know that those are the 3 things? From where did I derive this knowledge? Sure. So, if you had to identify the 3 most important behaviors, 3 most important activities that a school board can engage in that have the most leverage on impacting student outcomes, what would those 3 behaviors be? And then also be thinking about why it is you think that. Where did you get that knowledge from? And this goes to the idea that, as with anything, there are always stronger strategies and weaker strategies. as far as getting to an end? Okay. Before we ask what those 3 things you wrote down are, and know that we may never ask you what those 3 things you wrote down are, tell me where you learned about what you wrote down. Where did you attain the knowledge to write down those 3 things? Who will go first? Sarah?
And I hate to be a negative Nancy on a Saturday morning, but it's through experience with the school district and seeing where the board has failed. So over the last 12 years, as a parent, as an advocate, someone very involved, following it and seeing the program after program fail, or see the behavior literally in front of your eyes. So seeing that failure firsthand, I guess, is where I got my 3.
So from what you've seen from watching the school board over the last 12 years and from being a parent and
And a constituent
and
board
constituent
chair, yes.
board person in the community, thank you.
Yeah.
Who else? Where did you get your knowledge about those 3 things, Eric?
I read some of the material before,
Oh,
And so-
read some of the material before.
and from some of our previous questions.
And from some of the previous questions, great. Thank you, Eric. Who else?
I think just from personal experience of having the life experience of schools, my kids' experience in schools, of paying attention to the school board here, having lived in other cities and seeing what their structure and formulas are for public schools, has informed most of my beliefs.
Okay. So the experience you've had in other school districts and in this school district, all of those.
This school district, I've lived in several other cities and been involved
Yeah, so
in a
involvement.
variety of ways, yeah.
Okay, thank you. We'll just have everyone answer. Jen?
I'd say it's very similar, that it's based on what I've seen here, what I've seen in other places, but also I would say what I've seen of functional boards, I'll keep it
Yeah.
positive, in other industries
Okay.
as well. I
So,
think,
so from seeing functional boards
Yeah.
in other industries and also your
Yeah.
experience
Mhm.
here and watching. Thank you. Carol, how about you?
Well, it comes from multiple ways. I was a principal, so I know how to work with lots of different kinds of people. My own classroom experience, training that I've had in leadership, and practice, in working with different groups. I've been on a constituent board, I've been on a charter school board, and those experiences show you how important some of the behaviors are.
So your experience as an educator and being on other boards and all of that has shown you. One of the things we're going to encourage throughout this time is to center on yourself. So we always ask people to make I statements. It's very when we talk about things I've seen rather than things you've seen. Does that all make sense? So start bringing that home. Keith,
Working with legislators.
working with
Columbia,
legislators.
And then running professional development programs with teachers.
Okay.
Developing them and running them, listening to teachers.
Yeah, working with,
And mostly parents.
okay, working with legislators, running professional development for teachers, working with parents. Thank you. How about you, Thomas?
I think I could say so much, but I'm like, Ms. Carol.
We just want to
Just
know how
multiple-
you know.
It's just from personal experience. I've been
Yeah.
involved with CCSD for 16 years. I worked 11 as a substitute, the last 5 as a mentor and counselor, social media. Being involved in the community, we get a lot of feedback from our neighborhood association meetings. I've been the student improvement council president at North Charleston High School for 2 years. So I had a lot of experience talking with teachers, principals. With me, I can go on and on when it comes
Yeah.
to training. So that's basically.
Yeah, so all of those experiences that you've had have lent to why you wrote down the 3 things that you wrote down. Yeah, thank you. Well, the challenge that we often run into around governance is that governance, and especially governance of a school system, is largely not intuitive. And that's because many of us have a natural mental model, a natural idea of what it is to manage, or to have, in my case, to have been managed. However, we talk about governance as governance is not management one layer up. It is the community one layer down. So that's that representation of the vision and values of the community. So that's what a lot of what we're going to be continuing to talk about in this next couple hours or so, about getting that mental model around governance versus management. And I want you to hold on to all of the things that you've been writing down, because we may very well come back to that later. But for now, I am going to turn it over to Ben.
Yes, good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Glad to be here with you all. So we have one more set of knowledge building right here before we get into talking more about these 3 reasons or 3 most effective practices of boards. And that's differentiating between inputs, outputs, and outcomes. And so we're going to take this back to one of my favorite things, which is eating. And I am very often hungry. And so if I am hungry, what is the outcome that I want? What is the outcome that I want when I'm hungry?
To be full.
Full belly.
Or not be hungry.
Satisfied.
Yeah, to be full, to be satisfied. Why is having a sandwich ready to go in front of me not the outcome I want?
Because you're still not full.
You haven't taken it in.
Yeah, anyone else? Why is having a sandwich in front of me not the outcome I want? I have the food.
It's not what you want.
Didn't take the bite.
It's not within you.
Yeah, it's not getting me to the ultimate outcome, the goal that I'm trying to achieve. It's definitely really important, but if I can't eat it for whatever reason, or I'm allergic to peanut butter, that is not going to help me get to the outcome that I want. So when we talk about outcomes in governance, we talk about the ultimate impact that we're trying to achieve. At the end of a cycle, when we look back, did we meet our ultimate aim, our outcomes? But then we often talk about inputs also. So inputs are resources and strategies that I am going to invest on the front end to try to get to my ultimate outcome of being full. If I am planning, my strategy is going to be through eating a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, what are inputs that I would need to have to be able to implement my strategy and hopefully get to the outcome of being full? What are some inputs?
You need the time and the space to eat that.
Yep, I need time and space. What else do I need?
The bread.
I need bread, for sure. What else?
Knife, peanut butter, jelly.
Knife, peanut butter, jelly?
Tools.
Tools. What else do I need? What are other inputs?
Knowledge of what might be a good thing to eat versus a bad thing.
Yeah, I need some knowledge, not only of what to eat, but I also need other kinds of knowledge. What other kind of knowledge might I need?
Making sure you can eat peanut butter and jelly, you're not
Yeah,
allergic
that's
to
true.
peanut butter. I mean, yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
You need to know how to make the sandwich.
Yeah, I need to know how to make this. If you can tell a kindergartner to make a PB&J sandwich, they might not have the knowledge to do so. Anything else that we can think of? Any other inputs in this strategy? I think the only other one that I can come to mind is the skill. Like I need to be able to have the motor skills to make this sandwich. And so all of these things are inputs. They are not in and of themselves what I am trying to achieve, but they will help me to get to that ultimate outcome of feeling full. So now since we're talking about schools, let's imagine we are teachers with a class of hungry third graders. And in the same way, we want them to feel full. That's the ultimate outcome. So I've got all these inputs. I have taught them how to make PB&J sandwiches. I have bought all the peanut butter and jelly and all the bread and the knives and all this, and we're ready to go. I don't have to wait until the end of class to figure out, am I on track to making sure my kids are full? What are things that I can look at in the middle of the cycle as we go through this process to determine if I am on track to achieving my outcome of having my third graders feel full? What are some outputs I can look for in the midst of this process to determine if I'm on track?
Well, you can assess, you can watch and see how the students are making their sandwich, do that assessment.
Yep, I can look
See
at
if
how they're
they-
making the sandwiches.
See if they know what tools, see if they have the skills, see if they can say, oh, I'm allergic to peanut butter.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Yep. So who else?
I think you could see who's still hungry. So whose problem is solved by eating the sandwich, and if there's more needed for some kids and not others.
How might I know that?
I think maybe they're asking for more of the tools that you're providing. Maybe they need another piece of bread, or
Yeah.
through conversation.
Yeah, through conversation, through hearing the perspectives of my students on that. What else? What else could I look at to see if I am on track towards my students feeling full?
Yeah, how much of the sandwich has been consumed, if
Yeah.
any, their attention and engagement
Yeah,
with the sandwich.
yeah. Did they complete the sandwich? Did they take bites out of it? Are they halfway eaten with the sandwich? How much have they eaten? Are they on track to feeling full? If everyone made a sandwich but no one's eaten it, probably not going to feel full.
How do you know they're hungry?
So that is the outcome. There's a reason it's probably lunchtime, and so I am aiming for that.
Still, how do you know they're hungry? It's lunchtime.
So how would I know if my outcome is my outcome to get them to eat?
Well, yeah, I'm trying to understand. Once again, we get back to this starting point. It's lunchtime. I get up in the morning, I may not be hungry, I may not be. Now, kids,
Sure.
kids are gonna be hungry, and I understand you cut that off.
Remind me
You
what.
need to start at a base, you need to have a
Yes,
base.
for sure, absolutely. And yeah, we have a classroom of hungry third grade. They're saying we're hungry.
There you go.
All right, I got you.
There's your base.
And the outcome, regardless, is are they full?
How fast are they gonna hit those tools?
And the goal is, again, the outcome is are they full, not to get them to eat.
Right.
And so if I am doing these outputs and finding out that they're full, they don't need to eat to achieve the outcome, but the outcome is still being achieved. So we are going to now take this to a school system, but first again, I want to draw us to the definitions here. So an input are resources and activities invested in a particular program or strategy that are knowable at the beginning of the cycle, and they're a measure of how much effort is being applied to that. Outputs are parts of that cycle that are knowable in the middle of the cycle, and they are a measure of the implementation of your strategies. So you've got these inputs that you're applying into a strategy. Outputs are a result of those inputs in the middle of the cycle that tell you, and they're a measure of what kind of effort is being applied to that strategy. And then outcomes are the impact of the program or strategy at the end of a cycle, and they measure the intended effect on the beneficiary. And if you want to look at your handy manual, almost everything, if not everything we put up here is in this manual. Inputs, outputs, and outcomes are all described in the glossary on pages 8 through 12. So if you all are looking for those, you don't need to write them down. So let's take this to a school system, and I'm going to ask you just to jot a few of these things down, and then we'll share. When we're thinking about a school system, what are some things that are inputs in a school system? Take a few minutes and write some things down. What are inputs in a school system? All right, I'm sure you have quite a few written down. You could probably keep going for a while. Who wants to be the first to share? What are some inputs in a school system? Keith?
Curriculums?
Curriculums, absolutely.
Facilities?
Facilities, yep.
Teachers.
Teachers.
Materials.
Materials? Wow, that was great. That's a Yeah.
Children?
Children, you need children there.
Parent support?
Yeah, parent support.
Dollars.
Dollars. Other kinds of inputs.
Well, community, I mean, you talked about parent support, community support, the
Yeah.
administrative support,
Yep.
all that.
Any other inputs that people wrote down haven't been shared?
Transportation?
Transportation, buses, yep. Anything else?
The readiness level of the children?
Yep. Any kind of baseline understanding of where students are at? Yep.
Cafeteria.
Cafeteria, probably the food in the cafeteria. There is an infinite number of inputs. You can get granular, you can talk about what do the schedules look like? Do I have, how many days of school do I have? What class size? All of these things are inputs and pieces that get planned for, organizational charts, etc., that go into the school system at the beginning of a cycle. And hopefully they have and help you achieve your ultimate intended results or your outcomes. So now, midway through the school year or midway through the cycle, you've invested these resources, these inputs. What are some things you can look at in the middle of the cycle, these outputs, that help us measure our effort applied to our strategies at the beginning of the year? What are some measures that we can look at, some outputs? So go ahead and take a few minutes, write a few different ones down, and then we'll have you share it again. All right, who will be the first to share any outputs in a school system?
Report cards.
Report cards. Yep,
You took my, I was gonna say increasing grades, so I don't know if that's the same.
yeah, increasing grades,
Academic progress.
academic progress. Yep,
Teacher feedback.
teacher feedback, for sure.
Budgets?
Attendance,
Budget, dollars spent, and
Yeah.
dollars remaining.
budget and dollars spent, for sure.
Classroom environment.
Classroom environment, measured any number of ways.
Is it utilization of materials and facilities?
Yep, utilization, for sure.
There are surveys, there's a teacher association that does a survey
Yep.
for the teachers, and maybe there should be some parent surveys.
Yep, surveys to any number of groups, split any number of ways, for sure. Any other outputs I could look at?
You can look at the, any kind of formative assessments that
Yep.
are being used in the classroom.
Yep, absolutely. Formative assessments. Any other burning ones?
Has anyone said testing, like traditional testing?
Yeah, so I think formative assessments
Formative,
covers
okay,
that,
got
like
it.
during the middle of the year.
Yeah.
To give you.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
No, you're good.
Also, it's student engagement.
Yeah, student engagement. There's ways to measure that and look at that. How's that looking?
And this might go to kind of sum up all of like participation. School board is responsible to make sure that our schools have school improvement councils. Do they have them? Are they functioning? Do they run a
Yeah.
PTA, or are they really engaged, or is it really just the principal and a couple people every time?
Absolutely. Engagement data. Who's coming? Participation. Yeah. Again, just like inputs, there are an infinite number of these outputs you can look at. And the outputs you would want to be looking at would be the ones aligned to what you're trying to achieve with your inputs in the first place. So then let's move to the last one, outcomes. So think about outcomes. What are some examples of outcomes in a school system? Take a few minutes, write down a number of outcomes. And if you need the definitions, they are up on the screen or in your handout. All right, who will be the first to share? What are some examples of outcomes in a school system?
Overall improvement, meaning student improvement, parent involvement, grades, attendance.
So when would I be looking at those?
Well, this is at the end of, the outcome at the end of the cycle.
Yep, exactly. So any number of academic
Right, that's what I said.
tests,
It's
any
overall
attendance
improvement.
data at the end of the year. Yep. Parent engagement or approval at the end of the year through a survey. Yep, all outcomes.
You could look at the number of suspensions and expulsions.
Absolutely. Number of suspensions and expulsions at the end of the year.
Community growth and satisfaction,
Yep.
student success in life.
Yep. So community growth and satisfaction, I would assume you would measure that through some sort of survey at the end to find out what people felt. And then
Comment.
student success in life, you'd have some sort of definition for what that is, and you'd be looking at that. What are other outcomes at the end of the year?
You could look at graduation rates, that's right there,
Yep.
number.
Graduation rate, that's a big outcome.
Number of scholarships.
Yep. Number of scholarships, scholarship dollars, for sure. Other outcomes.
Reading levels.
Yep. Reading levels, measured any number of ways.
All
Math
of the
levels.
student learning measures that you can do
Yep.
on reading, math, science, social studies.
Yep, absolutely. Any other outcomes that people have that haven't been shared?
I wrote high-level comprehension of materials, so I think that sort of falls in line with a lot of the other.
Yeah. Yep. High level comprehension,
An infinite number of outcomes.
an infinite number of
All right.
outcomes. You can look at teacher retention rate, you can look at satisfaction rates, you can look at surveys, you can look at the percentage of buses that were on time throughout the year. Any number of outcomes that you can look at. And so this is where we come back to, Sarah, your question about outcomes. This is what we talk about when we talk about outcomes. There's infinite numbers of ones, and we cannot tell you what outcomes are important for you or your school system. That is solely up to the community and through the board. But we do want to add one extra layer to this idea of outcomes. And so if everyone can turn with me to page 11 in the document, can someone please read the definition of student outcomes?
Student outcomes, a measure of school system results that are student results rather than adult results. Outcomes that are a measure of what students know or are able to do. Student outcomes are distinct from adult outcomes.
Thank you. So with that, let's also, since it points us there, let's read adult outcomes. I think it's on page 8. Someone else could read that one.
Okay, I'll go. Adult outcomes, a measure of school system results that are not student results, outcomes that are not student outcomes. See outcomes, student outcomes definitions.
So this differentiation is a really key point for us. Is there's tons of outcomes, there's an infinite number of outcomes, but then we just want to make sure we are differentiating when we're thinking about student outcomes versus adult outcomes. It's not to say there aren't importances in both, but going back to what you all shared at the beginning about your reason and impact you want to see, every single one of you centered on students, and that's the reason why we differentiate these two. So when we talk about the outcomes we just mentioned, what are some of those that would be student outcomes? Think back to all the ones we just talked about.
Well, the student learning,
Mhm.
The discipline statistics,
Mhm.
graduation rate.
number of scholarships.
So let's look at the definition of this again. Let's be really thoughtful. And I'm going to draw your attention to, in student outcomes, what does it measure? It's a measure of
School system results
mhm.
that are student results.
Yep, next sentence.
Of what students know or are able to do.
Yes, so know or are able to do. And so when we think about this, we got to constantly think about that. And so I think one of the examples to look at is, you can have something that's focused on students. So discipline is a really important one, but is the discipline rates something about what students know or are able to do?
No.
Not quite. You might think there's some elements of it, but it doesn't really directly measure it. Really important, but it's not about what students know or are able to do, which would make it not a student outcome directly.
Right.
Because what is student discipline a measure of?
How a student is
Is it?
Problem-solving skills, that's what.
right. It's a skill, so I think it's debatable.
Yeah.
It's a little debatable. So it's
No,
Complicated.
you asked, say that question again?
right.
Your question again?
Is the student discipline rate a measure of what students know or are able to do? Or is it a measure of what adults are doing? Mhm.
Well, it could be both,
Both.
because it could be the students knowing how to be able to socialize and interact in a positive way, so that it does show that, but then it also shows teacher or adult judgment of their behavior in terms of what's acceptable or not acceptable. So it's kind of both.
Depends on what environment you're looking in. And if you're looking in the environment of the school, that's one thing. If you're looking in the environment outside and what they're being affected upon outside the school, that's another thing. When you look at discipline.
Say more about that, the environment in the school.
Environment, if you're worried, if you're looking at discipline within the environment of the schools, how engaged is the student in what the student is working with, what resources you're giving with, why you're giving him that, ounce of hope as to why they're using these resources. But then when you look at discipline from the outside, once they get into the community, it's social driven.
So when we're talking about the environment within the school, who creates that?
The adults.
Well, not if you engage students in goal setting and setting norms within the classroom. So the adult can guide it, but students can also be involved with setting the norms for the classroom.
Just want you all to keep all of this in mind as we're continue working through this.
Yeah, and you're right. And you made the point there, is adults can create this structure, and that's why this is a particular outcome is not a student outcome, because it's not specifically and only about what a student knows or is able to do. And that's the only differentiation. Again, not a judgment on its importance whatsoever.
Correct. Yeah.
So any other student outcomes when we think about this? Graduation rate, literacy or test scores at the end of the year, any other student outcomes?
So you could look at writing samples. You could see how well they're able to write or explain their thoughts. So it doesn't have to be, I mean, you probably have a rubric for it, but it wouldn't be our typical I ready or I pass, whatever they keep changing the tools, but the more authentic ways to see what they are able to do. I mean, we, when I had a science grant, we had assessments that we could use to see how the student actually conducted an experiment and how they collected their data. So there's more authentic ways to assess what students are able to know and do versus a multiple choice high stakes test.
Absolutely. Any of those ways you could be measures of the student outcomes. Yep. Keith, did you have something?
Student outcomes, that's an adult outcome. When you look at graduation rates. Graduation rates is what the adults want to see happen. Student outcome is what are they getting out of school at that point, whether they graduate or not.
Yeah. So, and I would say, in theory, and I understand there are some practical implications, but graduation usually requires a set of skills, whether it's passing of certain tests or courses in which students demonstrate their skills or knowledge in. And so that's why graduation is considered that way. But you're right, there's definitely some adult influence in a lot of these and whether or not kids get those skills or not.
I mean, because I think the biggest challenge, at least what we always see, is that you work with an 11th grader or a 12th grader and they have no clue what, I don't have any clue what I'm going to do when I was 11th, right?
Mhm.
Those few that you do find that are so set, they already know what they want to do.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
I think
Perception.
mental health is a
True.
good measurement at the end of student outcomes.
Say more about that. How would it be a measure of what students know or able to do?
Well, I think mental health sort of falls in line with how are we preparing them for the next phase of their life. And so I think there are ways to measure that through, I think a lot of when I was in high school, we did like a personality test at the end of the year that a lot of businesses use to sort of drive you into what your field might be best suited. I think there are ways to look at, again, whole child outcomes.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's different ways because the percentage of students who have taken a personality test or have they had access to mental health counseling or whatnot, those aren't student outcomes. Those are strategies or inputs or whatnot. Versus the percentage of students who can articulate what their strengths are, et cetera, and what they want to do, that may be a student outcome. So you're right, there's different ways to think about it. And what we're going to continue to push is like how you separate that to be specific about what is the thing that students know or are able to do. And then,
I was going to say,
go ahead, sorry.
problem solving and critical thinking, I think, are like fundamental. And I guess there's different ways to test that, but I think those are two big pieces of it.
Yep. And so we just want to keep that in mind. And just on the other flip side of that, adult outcomes are anything that's not a student outcome. And again, not a value judgment or importance judgment, but it's just really important to keep that difference in mind when we're talking about a school system and why a school system exists. So I'll pause there. Does anyone have any questions on inputs, outputs, or outcomes and being able to differentiate student outcomes and adult outcomes?
Is there a way to distinguish, because there's some things we're asking students to be engaged with as they learn, right? They're taking in material and learning to think critically. Some of it is it's our responsibility, the school district, to take care of these children through a period of time in the day and through years, like so their safety and nutrition and physical activity and things they may not have any choice around, but we're going to tell them this is your time to go run around, or we're going to house you and keep you safe for a period of time. And that at the end, when we say you're ready, we've successfully kept them safe and provided them good nutrition without necessarily them choosing any of that. But yet, like, is there a difference there, or is that?
So as we think about this, we have outcomes, whatever those happen to be for the school system that we aim for. You can think about this in multiple ways. If you have a specific thing, we want our students, one of our outcomes is to make sure that our students understand X, Y, and Z about health and their ability to live healthy lives, et cetera. That could be an outcome if that's a knowledge or a skill that they gain. More so, it's unlikely that you can help them meet their outcomes if they are not taken care of and safe. And so a lot of those are around inputs in the system, very critical inputs that create the environment where they can achieve those outcomes of being able to read or be career ready or whatever it happens to be. Great question. Any other questions about inputs, outputs, and outcomes?
I'm gonna push the discipline one more thing, just to see what piece I'm seeing, maybe what you're seeing. So we have numbers and statistics that show students who were referred for expulsion and they got help either through a drug and alcohol program here with CCSD. They were maybe placed at a turning point or one of our alternative schools. And so we have statistics on students who then came back and were successful. I mean, so I think that is, there's definitely got to be a student, something you can measure that, and you can compare, you know, where there students that just were expelled, where there's students that went through a program, and here it is on paper, numbers we can look at. They came back and they graduated, you know, so I think there are pieces there.
Yeah.
But our student outcomes.
I think you can, what you just said, I heard both, because that's very different from
Right.
discipline rate.
What I just said, discipline statistics,
Mhm.
and that's what I'm thinking of, because we work very hard in our, you know, Department of Alternative Placement, which I think they have a different name now. They work very hard, and we have those reports, and we've before looked at those reports and realized that there wasn't equity across the school district. We had some students doing the same thing in one part of town, getting this and that, and so I think that piece. So I'm just pushing all the time.
Go ahead, Rodney.
Well, I was going to say, you know, if the student is in math class and we're trying to see whether or not the student can do addition, then we can determine whether or not that student or those students have learned to master that concept. If you put the students in a class that's dealing with etiquette, then it's still about we are now teaching that student etiquette, and we're able to then measure and test whether or not they have learned what it is that we have taught. And so I think the student outcome piece still boils down to what is it that the student knows, or what is it the student is able to do based upon the input of the curriculum that we have provided. And so I think that's what I hear you saying, that there were a group of students who were given exposure to a particular set of lessons, and those lessons dealt with behaviors and other things. They mastered those lessons, and then as a result of that, we could measure whether or not they learned what we taught them. But then there was also a benefit that as a result of them mastering what we taught them, they were then able to rejoin their home school. So I think—
You said it much better than I did. So yeah.
And I think as we go into this next section, that's going to be apparent, because you're going to be able to pull out how you can get to those same ends. Any other questions on the inputs, outputs, and outcomes before we move on?
Totally separate question.
All right.
Will we have a break?
We will have
Yeah.
a break.
Should we take
You
one?
want to take one now?
Is that okay?
Yeah, we can take a break. How much, do y'all need 5 or 10 minutes?
That's fine.
5? All right, we'll see you here at 10:05.
Is where mine goes over and goes north there.
So our next stop here is going to be to talk about goals and understand what goals are and how they relate to inputs, outputs, outcomes, and the board's role in embodying the vision and values of the community. Let's start with a broad question. Why do we need goals, and why is it important for leaders to have goals? Take a few seconds to reflect on that, and I'd love to hear from someone who hasn't spoken much yet. Get some new voices.
So you said the question is, why do we need goals?
Why do we need goals? Why are goals important for leaders to have? Who will share? Collins? Let's start on this side of the side. Start with Thomas.
Oh, let's see what him somebody ever spoke, man. That's cool, I'm fine. I think we have goals, I think, first to hold everyone accountable. Guess to make sure that everyone is doing the job. I'm assuming we're referring to the board that they've been elected to do, because for the first time, if I could just maybe go off just a little bit, it's gonna be much easier to hold board members accountable because we're now being elected by single-member district. Because in the past, I mean, you know, you could just get elected because you had a popularity in one section and not another. But this go around here, I think it's gonna be the whole board members affect, to everyone be held accountable, and then again to make sure that the board members are working.
All right. So you need goals to be able to hold people accountable. Keith, what about you?
Yeah, I agree. I think once you understand what Columbia has set the guardrails on to what you're supposed to be accomplishing, you know, to hold staff accountable, or you have to have something to measure to see if you're getting any growth at all.
Yeah, you got to have something to measure to see if you're getting growth. Sarah, why do we have goals? Why are goals important?
So I'm a big to-do list person. Every night I have a to-do list for the next day. I'm carrying around all my, I'm old-fashioned. Can't figure out how to do it on my phone. So if you don't have goals set, then nothing is going to get done. So you have that. You set the goals. You have the accountability because everyone else can see your goals. But you have to have a plan. You have to have goals. We're going to do this, this, and this. Otherwise, it's going to be like, so-and-so called me. There's a problem. And whatever, football field, you know what I mean? There's too much, we're so big that you have to have goals that people can see and that you can have your to-do list and work on them.
Yep. Focus and being able to work on them. Carol, why do we have goals?
I wrote down to set expectations and to know when you've reached those expectations.
Set expectations and know when you've reached them. Yep. Air?
We have goals to translate our vision and values into actionable items.
So goals translate the vision and values into actionable items. Thank you. Grace?
I wrote to measure movement and to create vision.
Yep. To measure movement and create vision. Thank you. And Jen?
All right. Focus energy, time, etc., toward accomplishing something, some meaningful action.
Absolutely. So I think it's Yogi Berra that said, if I don't have a destination, how do I know when I got there? And that is exactly why we have goals and talk about goals. So one more question getting a little bit later. We talked just a minute ago about student outcomes. What's the difference between a student outcome and a student outcome goal? Difference between a student outcome and a student outcome goal.
A student outcome goal has a measurable place versus a student outcome is just what it is.
Yeah, a student outcome goal is measurable, whereas student outcome is just what it is. Yep.
I
Who else?
think Keith made the point earlier of having a starting point and having an ending point, and it's time bound. And
Yeah.
so you know when you're.
You got to know where you started,
Mhm.
to Keith's point, and you got to know where you're trying to go. It's time bound. Yep. Thank you.
The student goal, you have to understand what the student, I mean, that's, now you have a communication issue, a listening issue, an understanding issue between you and the student, because the student's setting that goal.
What do you mean?
Well, if I have an adult goal as what I'm trying to accomplish, then I have a student goal as what is he's trying to understand.
Yeah, okay.
accomplish. You know, you've got this crossover in understanding where you're gonna meet, or I guess, where you're both on the same page.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great definition about how those two can be different. You have an adult-focused goal versus a student-focused goal. Absolutely. What else differentiates a student goal, a student outcome goal, from a student outcome?
Is a student outcome goal an um, adult measured outcome versus a student outcome is a student, I'm not using the right word, the student measurement versus the adult measurement?
So that sounds like the difference between an adult outcome goal and a student outcome goal.
Yes, so is the goal, the student outcome goal, a measurement set by adults versus a measurement set by the student?
No, I mean, when we talk about a student outcome, we talked about, graduation rate, test score at the end of the year, some measure of what a student knows or is able to do.
So I think, are you playing off what Keith said a little bit there? Because you talked about a student having a goal for themselves. And we're talking about student outcome goals around student outcomes as the reason that school systems exist. So the broad, full community expectation that is distilled by the board, by the representation of the vision and values of the community into these student outcome goals. So yes, set by adults, the board, for the outcomes for the district, for the student outcomes, the results for students about what they know and are able to do. So, and what that may do is cause alignment all the way down to the classroom where the student also has a goal for their own accomplishment, their own efficacy, and what have you for what they.
I use the example of JROTC programs. The JROTC programs are so great when you get a student that gets into it in 9th grade, knowing that the ultimate goal is maybe to fly in the military or go into the military. So they know that tracking system has worked, they know that resource is there, and they understand fully at the end of the day what they're trying to accomplish. That's a great student goal when you talk to them, because they know specifically what they're trying to accomplish.
So a goal set by the student.
It's set by the student.
Yeah.
Knowing the resources the school is providing.
Yeah, thank you for that, Cindy, and that's a great clarification. A student outcome goal is a goal about what students know or are able to do. It is not necessarily set by a student. Adults can set student outcome goals if it's about what they know and are able to do, and students can set those as well. And so what we're talking about here is as far as leadership and board, is the board to be able to set student outcome goals. So you guys alluded to this. You heard measurable, time-bound, baseline, ending date, etc. And so a piece of terminology we hear a lot is SMART. And you guys kind of hit on that, SMART goals. And I'm going to direct everyone, if we can go to page 2 of your rubric. And I want you to take a few minutes and look at this. This is about vision and goals. And I want you to identify some different things we think about when we think about goals in a school system. So go ahead and identify what this rubric is telling us about what the goals are in a school system. Take a few minutes quietly and then we'll share out. What are some things that we expect to be true about goals based on this rubric?
They're student-centered and they're timely, and you meet the criteria that you have for SMART goals.
Thank you. They got their student outcomes focused, which can be seen in the third column at the top. And then they are SMART goals, which has the definitions there for what SMART means. What else is true about goals, Jen?
The thing that stood out to me was it talks about the ownership of the goals by the community, students, staff, everybody. I think that is it's in the blue column.
Can you
Which
read?
talks about ownership.
Yep. So there's shared ownership amongst these goals. Absolutely. What else is true about goals?
I think relying, is the last one, but the relying on a root cause analysis, I think to me that stands out the most, is how you determine your goals in the first place.
Yeah. The root cause analysis, understanding where you're at and what the needs are to set those goals. Anything else we see about goals that's specific here?
It looks like you can break them down into smaller goals. And so you'll have interim goals for
Yeah.
smaller time periods that lead towards the larger goal.
Yep, absolutely. We're going to have interim goals that lead to the larger goal.
You use the word adopted a lot.
Yeah. Adopted. They are adopted.
I mean, it's all adopted. Who's developing these goals?
Yeah. Does anyone see who develops the goals here in the rubric?
Sounds like the board and the superintendent together.
I think ideally it says students, parents, staff, and community members in a way that leads them to express ownership. I think it takes input from all of those people in order for it to be successful and for everyone to feel like the success is part of them too.
Yeah.
To buy in.
There's definitely, there's the ownership and the buy-in. But I'm going to draw everyone's attention to the first one in the yellow column, approaching student outcomes focus. Can someone read that first point there?
Some of us call it orange.
The board has adopted. The board has adopted in collaboration with the superintendent goals.
Yeah. Who adopts the goals?
The board.
The board. In collaboration, but the board ultimately adopts the goals. They own them. Anything else here that we saw about goals?
I saw something about how they last. I guess for how long they last.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Eric mentioned interim
5
goals
years
too.
or something,
but,
3 to 5 years.
Yep.
Well, green says 3 to
Green,
5, so did
yeah.
that translate over to blue? Because we know blue is the better, the best one, right?
Yep. So 3 to 5 years. And then I think the last point well, there's two more points in here. If we can read the third paragraph in the orange column. Can someone read that one for me?
I haven't read one yet. The board has adopted no fewer than 1 and no more than 5 goals. Fewer goals allow for greater focus, more allow for less.
Yeah. So there's 1 to 5 goals that get adopted. Why is it important to limit that at 5? Why do you think it's important to not have more than 5?
I mean, it really give you time to work. Because I agree with the statement, fewer goals allow for greater focus. So it gives us time really to work on those 5 goals, so you can have some results
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the quarter. I'm just saying quarter,
Yeah.
cycle.
Gives,
Because again, go ahead.
oh no, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying because again, the more goals, more bickering, and so that's gonna be less work. So we can just adopt 5, agree on those 5, and let's work to make those 5 happen.
There's more change of focus, less effort applied to any of those specific ones, absolutely. Any other reasons why we only adopt 1 to 5 goals?
What's really critical, like literacy and math.
Yeah.
If you just look at those 2 goals,
Yeah.
right
That's enough.
there,
Yeah.
everything else falls underneath it. It's like STEM. I used to always laugh at STEM. I said, if you can't read, why are we even talking about STEM?
Yeah. It differentiates the most important things from any other things that are important, but not the most important. I think it's Stephen Covey's work. They did a huge survey of these companies that have goals and looked at organizations. And for organizations that adopt 1 to 3 goals, how many goals do you usually think they accomplish?
Almost all.
3.
One to 3 of them. Mhm. For organizations that
Shareholder
adopt
price.
4 and 5 goals, how many do you think they accomplish?
1 to 3.
1 to 3.
1 to 2 of them. 1 to 2 of them. And then organizations that adopt more than 5 goals,
None.
0. Yeah. And it goes back to this idea of focus and prioritizing what is most important. And that's a hard conversation to decide what that is.
But the concern I have is that in this rubric, the board is adopting in the yellow, orange, is adopting the goals. And then we come back to the end process where the board used a process that included students, parents, and so on. So it's like, where was that process in terms of establishing the goals? Because I've been to 2 of these listening sessions, and I'm concerned that we're setting goals and people are saying we don't like high stakes testing.
Yeah.
So those goals are out there in terms of what the board is thinking about, and now they're getting input that I don't think is a match
Yeah. And I think
from what
that,
I'm hearing in the community.
and that's the question. I don't know if the board has brought any goals yet. I think that's coming up in a future meeting as they'll discuss the input from these community sessions. But in an ideal world, what you should see is that in this last blue box, the process is including students, parents, staff, community members in a way that those groups feel ownership in the goals and that the goals reflect the wider will of the community.
So, if
But
I
it
can.
seems to me that that piece should have been
Last year.
done earlier, before the goals were set.
So the goals have not been set. The superintendent brought forward some recommendations for where he believes that the high leverage, high need areas are in the organization around reading, math, college, and career readiness. Those are not the board's goals. Those are the goals that the superintendent has recommended. What you would might also note in the goals that the superintendent has brought forward, which we want the superintendent, because that's where the collaboration happens, is with the superintendent, because they are who the board hires as their educational expert. And they're charged with knowing the system and knowing where those high leverage, high need areas are. So we would anticipate that they would bring those recommendations forward. The goals that they've set are very, very expansive. They're within each of those math, reading, and other goals. There's actually multiple goals because they're talking about disaggregated goals from there. That's more than one goal. And we'll get more into that as well as Ben keeps going. So the board has not adopted goals. The superintendent has brought forward some recommendations. The board is out listening to the community now for vision and values, and this is a rubric around. And yes, we would say that grounding does need to be within the vision and values of the community. But remember, there's that's why there's nine people who are going to represent how far reaching is your community? I think I've heard this.
100 miles.
100 miles. So what Carol is hearing in the community is a snapshot of that. What Grace is hearing in the community is another snapshot of that. What Jen is hearing is another snapshot. John, Thomas, Keith, everybody is hearing from their communities, and that is going to be distilled into kind of themes and common underlying vision, common underlying values. So each of you may be hearing a lot of different things, and that's those are the hard conversations that Ben is talking about. It's coming together as a group of 9 to make these decisions representative of the whole, not just what, and I say this as being, I am a former board member. I was a board member for 8 years in Des Moines, Iowa, and I can tell you for certain, what I heard in my network was very different than what the network across town, what that representative was hearing about that. But there were some common underlying themes, and then coupled with that student performance data and those root cause analysis data and what that's the coupling of things that lead to the board going through this process. But the community is definitely a very important part of the process, and communicating that back out to the community, what we heard and what is that very next step that we're going to take toward the ultimate vision of our kids being successful, all of our kids being successful. Because again, this is about focus and that picking that 1 to 5 things that are the very next step over the next 3 to 5 years. So just keeping that in mind. So sorry, Beth.
Thank you. So let's look at some examples, and we didn't spend a lot of time here on SMART, but I think everyone mentioned it. So when we talk about SMART goals, we talk about specific goals. It's got a measure and it's got a population. We are specific. It's measurable. It has a clear starting points and ending points, just as Keith said. You got to know where you're starting to be able to identify where you want to go. Attainable. It means it's realistic and can actually be accomplished. It's results focused. It's a student outcome in a school system because, again, that's why school system exists. And it's time bound. It's got clear starting dates and ending dates. And again, for all of these definitions are in your handout in the glossary, pages 8 through 12. So if you ever forget what those are the definitions. So let's then look at this. And when we talk about this, again, here's specific. So they've got a starting point. They've got an ending point, they've got a start date, an end date, and they talk about a specific population. So let's look at this first non-example. Why is the first bullet point not an example of a student outcome goal?
It's too vague.
It's too vague. What makes it vague?
It doesn't have any starting or ending point. It doesn't have any measurable understanding of, improvement could be 1%, it could be 50%. There's no measurable.
Yeah. It's got none of the metrics of a SMART goal. It is just an aspirational statement with no concreteness. What about the second one? Percentage persisting in second year post-secondary will grow by 5% each year. Why is this not a student outcome goal?
Doesn't show the starting point, for
Does-
one thing.
Yeah, it doesn't show a starting point. Where are we starting? Why do we choose that? What else?
Doesn't seem attainable, 5% every year. Also
For how
doesn't
many
necessarily
years?
seem attainable, but depending on,
Yeah, I have no data to tell me that that's attainable. I don't know where we're at. I don't know what it's supposed to be. I have no idea. So it might be attainable. I just don't know.
It's also not really specific to who it's really targeting, right? It's not a specific group of, is it everybody? Does everybody need to grow by 5%?
Exactly. Is it every graduate? Is it graduates that go to college? Is it, what is that specific? Yep. Anything else?
It doesn't identify the variable that you're talking about. Is it reading? Is it math? Is it science? Is it social skills? What is it?
Yeah, exactly. So again, we need some more specificity there. And also, it doesn't have an ending point. Is it just going to go for 5% indefinitely, 105%, 110%? Probably not. Let's look at the last one. Can someone read the last one?
Percentage of quality teachers retained each year will increase from 78% in May 2017 to 93% in May 2022.
Why is this not a non-example of a goal for a school system?
It's not student outcomes.
It's not student outcomes. Probably very important.
It has nothing to do with students.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with students. And that's why it's not a student outcome goal.
But
Go ahead, Thomas.
I guess seeing it from a different perspective from schools where I normally work with and have worked in, mostly Title I schools that in some of the rough areas. For us, that's important because if we keep starting every year with new teachers, then we never build that relationship with our students. So we do everything in our power, and I'm speaking more so from the North Southern High School. We do everything in our power to make sure that our teachers come back. Because every time we starting over. So I understand, I think, looking at student outcome, that may not be, but this is very important to the success of any school. We have to retain those teachers. Because every time we start a new year, we're bringing in 15 new teachers. It takes us about 3 years. And within the 3 years, those 15 then go and we start all over again.
Yeah, again, this is no judgment on the importance of this. In fact, I think most everyone would agree that this is a critical step. But is that bullet point in and of itself the goal of a school system?
Should be.
A student outcome goal?
That should be within the.
And I'll give
I'm
an
not putting it in the top 5, I'm putting it in the top 7.
Well, so, but again, so let me give you an example. Imagine you have a system that has, it's got its rubric to identify quality teachers. And we identify the quality teachers, and we retained 100% of our quality teachers at this school. But our kids can't read. Is that the goal that am I achieving the purpose of a school system at that school?
Well, again, I think it varies within the schools you're talking about, for me.
I'm talking about a hypothetical school in which, based on your rubric, every teacher is a quality teacher and they stay, but no one can read. Have you achieved the goal of your school system?
Well, then, we got to go back and make sure our teachers can read.
But I think the key that Thomas, that you said a moment ago is, what we're talking about here is a student outcome goals.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's not a student outcome goal.
Right.
But I think I've heard also that you definitely said it is important input towards achieving that student outcome goal.
It's a district goal.
It might be a goal
Right.
within the system,
District goals.
but not the outcome goal that the board is setting
Correct.
as a student outcome goal.
And I'll ask you to pause on that, because I think we are going to come back around and you will see the place where that fits in to this framework.
Yeah, okay, that's what I was wondering, like,
Yeah.
because I think, I agree with Thomas, it's a very important goal, so where does it fit within the system, having student outcome
And-
goals and district goals
And
as
we-
well?
Yeah,
And there'll be a couple places where it could.
Okay.
we're going to get through that.
I have a question too on that one, just in the wording of it, based on the outline of, examples of what are good goals. Using a word like quality, which is so subjective, seems to me to take away from the effectiveness of that goal, because it's so subjective.
Even in and of itself, that's absolutely a goal. And you're right, though. That quality, is that specific, or is that whose definition of quality? Now, there might be a very clear rubric that says this is how we define quality. And then maybe it's a lot clearer. But in the absence of that, you're right, it's not specific.
Well, you could always change that
Yeah.
word quality to certified,
Yeah, you could do certified. Yep, you could do
that you can measure.
But just to that point, though, even this is not a student outcome goal.
Right.
We're just going to say that. We're just going to talk about the word quality, though. If a board wrote any policy statement and used the word quality and did not define it, who gets to define it?
Well, then you get judged on that, because the public is defining it for themselves rather than it being.
But these policies are what you hand to the superintendent to accomplish. If the board doesn't say what quality means, who says what quality means?
Superintendent.
Then the superintendent defines it.
So where the board stops defining the
You
superintendent.
said we hired the superintendent as an educational expert, he's providing the stuff for us to review, because he works for us.
Right, but if that's what you chose to give him without any more explanation, then what I'm saying is that the board might want to be more specific. Some boards might use those exact same words, and yeah, I'm taking us off on a rabbit hole. So I'm going to hand it back over to Ben. But my point is that as where the board stops writing is where the superintendent starts interpreting, essentially.
Because the superintendent knows what his tools are, he knows his staff, and he knows what he's capable. That's what, is it attainable? You only know it because of the expert you hired and relying on his expertise.
Yeah. And to bring this part to a close, the entire purpose of setting these 1 to 5 goals is to create clarity and create focus in your school system and in your organization. From the community and the board, and then that echoes the rest of the way. In the absence of having clear goals and focus, every goal and every focus that anybody has is what's important to them. And there's not the same page on what that is. And the entire purpose of why we talk about this is to ground ourselves in why a school system exists, to improve outcomes for kids, regardless of how you define and what those outcomes are important. And then to set goals, student outcome goals that define that so there's clarity throughout the system as we move forward. But beyond that, you've got to get a little bit more specific and you've got to figure out how we're on track. So I'm going to pass it off to Rodney, who's going to take us through that aspect.
Okay. Get a chance to join a little bit more in the conversation. We're going to take an opportunity to delve a little bit more into what I heard was raised earlier as we talked about the purpose of a school system to improve student outcomes. So all of this is about a process of improvement. And so as part of that, there's being able to monitor how the school division is performing based upon the goals that the board has set, and also for the board to be able to monitor its own performance and being able to monitor the superintendent with whom the board will hold accountable. So we're going to start with acknowledging we've discussed inputs, we've discussed outputs, we've discussed outcomes, we've distinguished between student outcomes and adult outcomes, and we've talked about the difference between student outcomes and goals. And so Cindy a moment ago mentioned something that I think was very important. She used the two words policy statements. So these goals, the work that you're doing, are policy statements of the board. And as you get more and more into the importance and work of the board, you will hear often that boards govern through policy. And so the goals that we've talked about, the outcomes that we've talked about, those are important policy statements. And we will also get an opportunity to talk about the fact that the board represents the vision and values of the community. So we've had a lot of conversation about the vision. We've touched on some about the values. So I want to talk also a little bit about a policy statement that we'll get to, something that's called a guardrail. And so the guardrail then begins to add the non-negotiable value policy statements as part of that work as well. I'm going to, I think, skip a slide, if I may, for a moment. Let's go to interim goals. If we look in, and I'll be going through this manual, your governance framework that you have before you. Let's go back to a moment to page 2. So when we talked about the fact that we had SMART goals, we also have something called interim goals. And so an interim goal is an indicator. Normally, get my microphone right. Normally a student output used to determine whether or not a goal is likely to be met. And there are 3 important properties as part of an interim goal, just as we talked about goals in general. So interim goals also are SMART. Now, could someone look at page 2 and go over to the Mastering Student Outcomes focus column. That's the light blue. And there's a second item, second bullet, if you will, on that column. Could somebody read that second item for me, please? On page 2, under Mastering Student Outcomes focus, in the light blue.
All of the interim goals are predictive of their respective goals and are influenceable by the superintendent and the superintendent's team. Predictive suggests that there is some evidence of a correlation between the interim goal and the goal. Influenceable suggests that the superintendent, and through them the staff, has authority over roughly 80% of the inputs the interim goal is measuring.
Thank you very much for reading that. What does it mean? What does influenceable by the superintendent mean? What do you think that means? Jen, what do you think that means, influenceable by the superintendent?
I think that it is within their power, their ability to impact it. It is not something outside of their their impact. I'm trying to.
Can you give me an example of something you said on the outside that you think would not be influenceable by the superintendent?
I would say maybe state or national changes, the weather, the things that are just really outside of their job and what they can influence.
Okay, thank you. What someone else thinks? What does it mean that to be influenceable by the superintendent? Any other thoughts? Grace, you have a thought?
I always have thoughts, Rodney.
Good. Please share.
I would say, I think that perhaps this is something that he's empowered to do, that he doesn't have to come back to the board, that he can manage without the board managing him, right? So him or her. So maybe it's making a decision for some large change that maybe in the past the board has said, no, you have to come back to us for a management decision on that, but empowering that person to take on more decisions with board oversight in the end. But I think probably this is relating exactly to what's happening with the board right now, of what they just released, of giving the superintendent some more powers.
So I'm going to ask if you will hold that and put a point there, because I think we're going to get an opportunity to talk a little bit more about that a little bit later. What I want to still focus on is goals. So we're still talking about goals, and we are dealing now with the board has established SMART goals, as Ben walked us through. We're now talking about interim goals, where the superintendent now is going to be bringing recommendations on how to achieve the goals that the board has adopted on an interim basis. So we're really talking about, now that these goals have been established and we have these interim goals, what does it mean to be influenceable by the superintendent? So for example, do you think that the superintendent has influence whether or not a child goes home and opens up the book and reads the book? Right. So when we talk about influenceable, we're really talking about those things that truly the superintendent and the superintendent's team has influence over. Okay. Any questions about that?
Part of
We
it.
would know that in the goals as he presented them when he started them off.
I'm sorry, say it
He
again,
would have
sir.
set out the procedure, what he's doing, how he intends to accomplish these goals. You're now getting to an interim point. So now you're modifying these goals?
No, we're not modifying the goals. The board has established the goals.
Right.
Now we're talking
Adopted.
about, I'm sorry, yes, sir. Very good. Has adopted the goals. Now we're talking about the interim goals that the superintendent's going to be recommending for achieving what the board has adopted. So let me see if I can give an example. I may have a goal to lose 20 pounds by, in a year. There are interim goals that I could set along the way as to how I'm going to eventually reach the long-term goal that has been adopted. So what we're talking about now is the superintendent. If you go back to our chart here, the superintendent, if you look at in the orange on the fourth bullet, can somebody read that as far as where it references interim goals? 1, 2, 3, 4 in the orange on page 2.
So the superintendent has adopted, in collaboration with the board, 1 to 3 interim goals to progress, monitor each goal, and each interim goal is SMART.
Correct. So there's the superintendent now has some ownership around bringing forward to the board in collaboration these 1 to 3 interim goals for us to progress monitor. And Cindy, if you like to.
Yeah, just take a minute to look under meeting student outcomes focus. I think this will help, and then we can come back to the whole idea about that Rodney was talking about under influenceable and predictive. So third item under meeting student outcomes focus. Thomas, would you mind reading that?
All interim goals pertain to student output or student outcomes, not inputs or adult outputs.
Right, so it comes back to what we started with, the inputs, outputs, outcomes. These are most often outputs, and they are student outputs and not adult outputs. So they're not revisions of the overall goal. They're interim goals used to monitor progress toward the goal, and they relate to student outputs most often. Okay.
All right, we're good?
We're good. Go for it.
All right. So we also want to talk about the importance of being able to monitor. And so what we read a moment ago, we used the phrase progress monitoring. So how does the board be able to keep track of how the school division is performing? So now that we have these building blocks of goal. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
When we just back up,
Okay.
we were talking about influenceable by the superintendent and superintendent's team.
Mm-hmm.
Suddenly we go to interim goals, and we never really answered the question as to what's influenceable by the superintendent. So we have these goals. So what you're saying is that he has full control over how these goals are meeting the SMART assessment?
Can you repeat that? I'm trying to make sure.
I'm just trying, it's influenceable, so that means that basically the superintendent and his staff are taking ownership of these interim goals, which have been given to the board as part of the process when it's adopted as the major goal.
The board has adopted the goals.
Adopted the goal, and now the superintendent is proceeding forth, and he's got pretty much control over how these interim goals are following under this SMART matrix.
In collaboration with the board.
Well, that's not what it says. Influenceable by the superintendent.
I
The
think that
third
means
item.
it's part of his job
Oh,
description.
Okay.
And which
No, I think this is all great. So let's make sure we're all clear on all of
I
it.
see where it's going.
Yeah. So if you look in the and again, this is a rubric. This is actually a self-evaluation instrument for the board as well. You notice all the point system, points across the top. That's how the board measures progress toward implementation and continuous improvement around a student outcomes focused model. Not telling the board what to do, but giving a system, that mental model we talked about for governing versus managing. So the board has adopted the overall SMART goal, the end of cycle goal, 5 years in length, 3 to 5 years in length. Now the superintendent If you look at that fourth item under approaching student outcomes, superintendent has adopted in collaboration with the board the 1 to 3 interim goals to progress monitor each goal, and then each interim goal is SMART. So this is about those student outputs, sometimes student outcomes, depending on where in the cycle we're measuring, but most often student outputs, that's what we really encourage, that are going to be able to be measured throughout the cycle to show whether or not that goal has a likelihood of being met. So then when you come to that mastering student outcomes focus, when we talked about the superintendent being able to influence them, this is in part why the superintendent is the one adopting them in collaboration, because they know what is to Jen's point earlier, within their realm of control and ability within the school system to use to be able to actually influence movement along those goals. So if you have a reading goal, and a great strategy toward a reading goal would be great if every child would be read to every night at home before bed. Can the superintendent go into every household and make sure that that's happening? No, not influenceable. However, influenceable, there are other things that the superintendent can have strategy.
For example, the superintendent could ensure that each child is given a book once a week to take home so they have something to read. Is that what you're talking about?
More about, do you remember those student output measures? Remember when we talked generally, what are outputs in a school system? What would be an output in a school system to measure a student outcome? You talked about some of those things earlier.
Well, that's sort of like you're providing the sandwich, but that doesn't mean that the child ate it.
Right. So we want to make sure that our strategies are actually working and have a likelihood to achieve the goal. So it might be, and I'm just going to use this as an example because it's an easy example to use. If you have a student outcome goal based on your state, say you have a reading goal based on your state assessment, then those formative assessments in the midst of the cycle that you might be having a fall, winter, spring assessment, those are measures that might be that student output that tell if there's a likelihood that at the end of the cycle you're going to meet that goal. So that's an example. But I can't measure, I can't say that the superintendent is going to bring a student outcome goal around the number of books a child is read to at home, because I don't have, as a superintendent, influence over that. We'll keep moving, and you'll have an opportunity to ask questions. The other part of that, I want you to see, what do you think? So this is another important part. You also see that they're influenceable, but there's another word, influenceable by the superintendent and predictive. What does predictive mean? Why would we want them to be predictive?
Okay, thank you.
They're well thought out.
They're well thought out?
Yeah.
Yeah. Why else?
It
Why
lets
else?
us know the likelihood of the goal being achieved. So
Yeah. If you're measuring something that isn't predictive of your ultimate goal, that has no correlation or very low correlation to your ultimate goal, and you're looking at that, and then you're surprised when you don't meet it at the end, yeah, you want something as highly correlated as possible to be monitoring, because you're monitoring progress along the way to the likelihood of achieving that goal. So you want it to
So you're
correlate.
talking about research-based practices that would be used to get to the student incomes? I'm having a hard time with these two words because you're not being specific about what they mean. Because I was thinking like influential, well, the superintendent is influential in terms of the amount of budget dollars he can allocate
So-
towards a particular program.
So they have
Or
authority-
the staff he hires, or how he organizes the department that is focused on
All those are
reading.
influenceable by the
Okay.
superintendent.
All right.
Yep, those
Well-
influenceable inputs.
But what I guess the word that we're really talking about now in terms of influenceable and predictive is alignment. So if you have a goal and you have interim goals, but they are misaligned, then you have the scenario that Cindy just said, where you think you're moving in a direction to achieve something, and then you find out that you haven't achieved it because you don't have alignment. I'll take you to another example. If you go to page 12 in your manual, you'll see that if you recall, you all had discussions with Ben around goals. So you went through, I have this slide up on the screen, we talked about non-examples of goals. On this particular page, you can see at the top that there are examples of sample goals, but then at the bottom of the first half, there are also sample interim goals. So can someone read the second bullet under sample interim goals? Anyone volunteer?
Many of these examples are drawn from the CGCS academic KPIs work.
Okay, now go to the second one, the second bullet after that one.
The percentage of students showing growth from one formative assessment to the next will increase from W% on X to Y% by Z.
Yeah, so that's the third bullet. So that gives it. So that what that's saying is that if you've established a adopted a goal, and then you're looking at the interim goal, the percentage of students showing growth from one form of assessment to the next will increase from however it's spelled out in a smart way. You want to make sure that there's alignment between the goal that's been adopted and the interim goal that the superintendent has adopted in collaboration with the board, so that you can see that throughout this cycle that what he is proposing and you're monitoring on an interim basis is leading you towards the goal that the board has adopted. That makes sense? So as part of all this, we use the terminology of monitoring. And I can tell from the conversation that sounds like all of you have very much watched board meetings or have been involved with the school system in many ways. Tell me, how would you feel if you knew as a board member the topics that were going to be discussed at board meetings in advance? How would that make you feel? What do you think that would look like?
More than just on Friday afternoon before the Monday meeting.
More than just Friday afternoon before the Monday meeting. Talk to me about that.
Well, I mean, if you ever look at a board packet, there's a lot of information that is there, and it's a lot to consume, and if it's out there publicly, you're going to get comments from public, and the reality of it is, if you don't want a lot of public information and you don't want a lot of thoughtful process, give it to me Friday afternoon and expect me by Monday to have read all of this information, as well as community people to read the information. That just says, no, you don't want to give a lot of thoughtfulness to what's going on. So, so that is a practice that I think is, really hard. If somebody's been on the front end of writing a piece for the board agenda item and, worked on it for a month before it was presented, and then it hasn't been thoughtfully, explained, or it's been so digested that doesn't reflect really what's going on. I mean, it's just not a good practice to have that happen.
So on the flip side of it,
Yeah.
what would you all see as the benefit if you knew months in advance what was going to be discussed, if you received months in advance the data or information associated with what was going to be discussed, what do you think the benefit would be to you as school board members if you knew that information when it was coming and you had it in advance? What could that mean for you?
Better prepared.
Better prepared, Eric?
Able to ask questions to the right people ahead of that.
You can be in a position to ask questions or alert the administration of questions that you may have as part of the presentation. Anyone else?
You can also get a sense of how the public is responding so that you're prepared to answer to the public questions.
So the public also would have the benefit of seeing what you're receiving and also be able to follow and observe what you all are discussing with the superintendent as you are doing that work. So we call that progress monitoring. And so I have two definitions on the screen. Would someone be willing to read the definition for monitoring calendar?
I'll read it. A board-adopted multi-year schedule that describes the months during which specific progress measures are reported to the board.
Okay.
And I think that would help with the planning by the superintendent and the staff to know, all right, this is when we're going to discuss this, this is when we need to pull the information together to see if we're meeting the goals.
And will someone read the definition for monitoring report? Sarah?
All right. A report that evidences to the board whether or not reality matches the adopted goals and guardrails.
Thank you. So there's two important pieces there. So one, as we just mentioned, the calendar itself provides this multi-year schedule. And then there's a monitoring report that the superintendent is preparing to the board it could be in the form of a memo that has information on it that ties to what you will be discussing and observing and having conversations about based upon these goals and interim goals that we've discussed. Can you give me another thought on what it would mean to the school division as a whole or to the community as a whole if at board meetings you had this information in advance and the board was spending time at the meeting reviewing the report and having conversations around progress towards improving student outcomes? What do you think that benefit would produce for the division as a whole or for the community as they watch you do that work with the superintendent?
Transparency.
Transparency, okay.
Collaboration.
Collaboration,
Some consistency.
consistency.
You can look at the same metrics over time.
You can look at the same metrics over time. Jen?
As a structured, less chaos.
Structure, less chaos. Any other thoughts?
I think people will have a confidence in the school board that they're doing what they're supposed to, so they actually might not watch anymore because it's not so entertaining.
But you make a good point. They may not watch for negative things, but they may watch because now they are learning things. And so if excellence in the classroom starts with excellence in the boardroom, then in essence what I hear each of you saying is that by you doing this work, focus on student outcomes, being able to have conversations around your goals and your interim goals and the information and data that the administration is bringing forward for you to have these discussions, you're really setting an entire climate. You're setting the expectation now that the school board meeting is not the latest reality show. The school board business is about the focus on improving student outcomes. And if I, as a parent or as a teacher or any other stakeholder, a business person, if I want to have watch a school board meeting now to find out where the division is going based upon all this work that has been done. You've now set a culture that this is what our expectations are as a board. This is what our expectation is as a school division, and this is what we're about. So progress monitoring and this process that we're walking you through really does provide an opportunity for the board to begin to focus its time on student outcomes and set a climate and culture for the entire community, the school community, and the community at large, that this is what we're about. So if you look on page 12 in your framework, I just want to give this to you as a reference that you can also look at, that we've included more information about progress monitoring, what it looks like, conversation between the board and the superintendent. 17 on mine. What's it on yours?
You said 12.
Oh, did I say 12? I'm sorry. 17. I have 12 on my mind for some reason. Yes, page 17. Does everybody have that?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it says progress monitoring student outcomes at the top. And so I just wanted to again reinforce that this tool is available for you. You can see down in the second portion of that page where it speaks to understanding progress monitoring, and it speaks to some of the things that you all just shared in your answers about leading by example. Gives an opportunity to clarify strategies and communicate expectations. And also something that's very important, because as the Board of Trustees, these goals that are being established, these outcomes that we're monitoring, also then can feed into your evaluation of how the superintendent is performing. And ultimately, as Cindy mentioned, as this entire process also gives the board the opportunity to do your own self-evaluation of how you are performing as well. So we recommend, as part of this SOFG framework, that in your public meetings, that no less than 50% of your time is spent on monitoring student outcomes. So as let me get your thoughts on that. Considering the conversation, the questions we just had around, what do you think that would model? What do you think it would mean to yourself as a board of trustees? What do you think it would mean to the administration and the rest of the school community if you as a board was spending no less than 50% of your time in public meetings focused on monitoring progress?
Well, this whole thing misses the big elephant that's walking around this China room. You don't talk anything about funding, and you want me to give up all the influence on the funding and interim to the superintendent? I mean, there's nothing in here that talks about how we're controlling the funding at all.
So we're gonna, well, one, I'm gonna put a point there, but I will say to you that part of this framework is, as the board adopts its goals and as you go through this process, then not only are you have the opportunity to set expectation around the superintendent's evaluation, you also have set the expectation now as the superintendent comes forward with interim goals, that you get to have a conversation around, please tell me how the budget recommendations that you are coming up with align. We talked about alignment earlier, align with the board's goals and aligns with the interim goals and the strategies that you are bringing forward. So I would suggest to you that by going through this process, it allows you to have a much more focused and aligned conversation around budget and resources. And so we will, again, as Cindy mentioned earlier, we're giving you a 2 to 3 hour overview of something that we may normally do in an introductory workshop over 2 days. And then going back to a question that was raised earlier about the importance of improving outcomes. So as trustees, you're also improving. And so that's why when you look throughout this framework, you see that there's a column for not student outcome focused at all. There's a column for approaching student outcomes focused. So as a board, you will be improving over time. This is not something that you come to a 2 to 3 hour work session and you just immediately become a mastering student outcomes focused board. We have to improve ourselves as well. And so again, we would be monitoring, or you would be monitoring for your students and for your school community as you're growing towards mastering student outcomes. Then also students and others can grow as well. Yes, Grace.
To answer your question, I would say that by spending 50% of your time,
No less than.
no less than 50%, you are proving to the community that you are that is your priority, that student outcomes is your highest priority. And I think by not doing that, you get caught up in the minutia of all of the other stuff that doesn't actually lead to, or that may seem like it leads to, but isn't actually focused on that student outcome.
Yeah, so we often will describe that as the whirlwind. So it's all these other things that are being out there, buildings and uniforms and this concern and that concern. Not that those things aren't important, but by having the focus and having the tools and resources at your disposal to have that focus, to have that alignment, and spending no less than 50% of your time on student outcomes, you also are communicating back to the community the vision, right? Because you've had those conversations and now you're demonstrating how those things are being implemented towards student success. So before I go on to the next piece, any other questions or comments about progress monitoring, the calendar, the report, and how these tools can be used to align with the goals and interim goals and what we've discussed thus far? Carol?
Well, based on your experience, how much time has this taken for boards to work with the superintendent to come up with the goals and to, I mean, it's a lot, like, developing the monitoring calendar and the reports and so on and so forth. How much time does it take in terms of training? I mean, because we're all sitting here trying to come up with a common language, trying to understand a model. So how long does it take for a board, to come together to understand this process, commit to the process? I mean, we're all coming from different places.
So, all three of us have been or are school board members. This is not a one-size-fits-all. So what may work for you and your community may be different from others. But I will say just from my experience that a lot of that depends upon the will and the commitment of the Board of Trustees. I think I would have loved, in my consideration of being a school board member, to come to a school board member school like this that would have given me the opportunity to learn what the current board is doing, get me immersed in some respects to that language so that it would improve me in coming on board and hitting the ground running. So I think that oftentimes it's really a matter of the 9 people in this case coming together and having the commitment to focus on student outcomes. And others like to add any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so the first part of the process is that learning process, and Rodney mentioned that two-day workshop. Given that there is essentially going to be, I believe, at least 6 new board members for sure. I know all 9 seats are up, so there could be 9 new board members. There will definitely be 6 new board members. I think our recommendation would be that the new iteration of the board go through that full 2-day training to get the benefit of the full 2 days of learning. But the goals process, the goals and guardrails drafting process, that is what the current board has kicked into gear. As far as full implementation of all of the aspects of this rubric, you saw that there's 6 pages and 6 different domains that also touch on various governance practice improvements as well. There's stuff around realigning an agenda to be more student outcomes focused, realigning, and I know this has been, there's probably, and I heard the question, we were here yesterday listening while the board members were doing the listening session with some of you all around vision and values. I know there was around the policy manual, which has not occurred. That is a very, very lengthy, thoughtful, drawn out process around how the board thinks about policy, that about revising policy and what belongs with the superintendent and what belongs remaining with the board. So I did hear Dr. French say that process is not kicked into place, that is a long process. So I'm giving a long answer right now that I could have shortened to say we often do a 12 to 18 month implementation timeline with the board to get through all aspects of this, because it isn't an overnight process, and there is training that happens, there is discussion, debate and the intentionality around we do, and that progress monitoring guide that Rodney mentioned as well. We do practice trainings with monitoring for monitoring sessions as well, because it may seem like a simple ask questions, but there are actually questions that are more effective than others at getting to the what and the why and the how than others, and that's a muscle that a lot of board members need to build. So it's a process. It won't happen overnight, and we for as long as the board will have us, will be a resource to help along the way of that implementation process. So
will the current board, are they crafting sort of a framework of beginning model of what this looks like? Is that what they're working on now?
They're working on doing that community listening and community surveying, and looking at the current student performance data, what the reality is for the Charleston County School District students right now, to look at crafting a set of goals and guardrails using all of that information collected, and drafting and potentially adopting those so that the budget cycle around actually planning, the budget planning cycle to impact those goals can happen. So that's the intent as of now. And then leaving that for the next board, because I think I heard Dr. French also say yesterday that there has, and any of you who were here can correct me if I'm wrong, but board members have mentioned there were not specific measurable goals when they came on board, and so this is a process that they're trying to get started so that the next iteration of the board can really begin that focus, come in to focus on something.
Well,
So
this is a real culture change.
Yes.
For what we've seen with how the board has operated. And so, I don't know when the current board started this, process. We're in a real position right now they're starting something that, who knows whether the community's gonna go along with it, whether the new board members will go with it. But this is a tremendous culture change.
Yeah.
And if you look at how the agenda is, you know, in the 2 meetings they have left, I don't know that they can change the whole agenda.
No,
to reflect.
no, because
that's
again,
It's
it's,
gonna process,
right, it's
yeah,
process
yeah.
improvement.
So-
Process improvement
Yeah.
over the course of the
Right.
next 12 to 18 months.
Right.
From, yeah, they will not get an agenda change. They will not get any of those things
Well, it's not only the
done.
board culture change, it's the superintendent, it's the staff.
Absolutely.
It's-
All of
Absolutely.
it. I mean, I think that, you know, the staff within the district has tried to be focused on achievement goals and student outcomes. But when you start with a strategic plan originally that had no SMART goals or expectations or
So-
no community support or community support
so
that
you are-
wasn't trusted, I mean, there's
Yeah.
just a lot of
No, right.
stuff going on
So
here.
excuse me for, because I don't,
Yeah.
I'm cutting across you, but I don't mean to cut across
Right.
you, but I just want
That's
to,
okay.
what I really want to say is, I think what I'm hearing you articulate is what I said earlier, that excellence in the boardroom can lead to excellence all the way throughout the system to the classroom. And so what I think you have the opportunity to do now with this framework is to learn from the mistakes that you may have seen in the past, and let's reframe this culture. And so if it, I don't know, I don't live here, but if it did exist a time where you didn't have SMART goals, we can have them now. If there was a time where there wasn't focus on student outcomes, we can have them now. And each of you have the power within your hands through this framework to make happen what I hear you saying you want to see happen based upon what the community is saying to you. And I think this tool gives you the opportunity to do that, tailored to the needs of your unique community. And so that's what we're presenting and why we're doing this school. And I think it's a good step forward to try to get the type of alignment that we've talked about thus far. But I want to move on because there's another important piece. There have been a couple of times throughout today where I've said or others have said, let's stick a pin in something. So let's talk about where we are. So we have discussed setting student outcome goals and monitoring those goals. I want to reemphasize the job of the board is to represent the vision and values of the community. So the work related to student goals and interim goals reflects the vision part. That's the vision of the community, where the community wants the school system to go. Now we're going to discuss the values of the community, what the community doesn't want to see happen on the journey to complete that vision. And so we talk and describe those values as guardrails. Who would be willing to read this definition on the screen, also found on page 9 in the manual? So it's on the screen, guardrails. It's also on page 9 in the manual. So what are guardrails?
I'll read it.
Okay, go ahead, Jen.
Okay.
Go ahead.
All right. Guardrails, an operational action or class of actions, usually strategic, not tactical. The superintendent may not use or allow in pursuit of the school system's student outcome goals. Guardrails are based on the community's values and should not undermine the school system's ability to meet the goals, though guardrails will often require the superintendent to accomplish the goals in a different way.
So in essence, guardrails describe what we will not do in order to uphold the values of the community. Stephen Covey says it this way: in order to change, you have to have a changeless understanding of who you are and where you come from and what you value. So guardrails provides this opportunity now for specific prohibitions on the superintendent's authority that are aligned with the vision and grounded in the community values. And so we describe these guardrails in not language. So the superintendent is not allowed to do this, or the superintendent is not allowed to do that. And often they are written in the framework of similar to the Ten Commandments. You know, ye shall not do such. So can anyone give me a thought or ideas on why you think it's important to have clear statements that would restrict the superintendent's provide prohibitions on what the superintendent may be allowed to do or not be allowed to do, and how that would represent values of the community? You've talked about many of them throughout the day, so I just wanted to see if there's any ideas on what you think about guardrails and prohibitions on the superintendent's authority. What would be some benefits to the board and some benefits to the superintendent to have that?
Budget,
Say more. What do you mean?
budget, staying within the budget. Perfect example, going out and buying a bunch of lesson plans when teachers can develop lesson plans, retaining a bunch of vendors to accomplish a goal.
Well, you know, it's interesting because as you are, you know, considering, you know, boards have the authority to retain and hire superintendents. I think you're right about the budget, but I also think it would be fair to say that you would have a certain amount of expectation that the superintendent would be fiscally responsible as a
absolutely. You
baseline.
don't want to be
Right.
get into the minutia of what he has to do on a day-to-day basis to accomplish his goals, but obviously, you know, I'm part of a state agency. I've got strict restrictions on how much money I can spend without getting proper authority.
What might be?
Procurement code's pretty clear, and everybody knows that, but nevertheless, still, any major change during an interim goal, trying to accomplish an interim goal that would require some type of review of the budget and what was called within the budget, guardrails have to be put in.
Mhm.
It keeps the superintendent in line.
Okay. Other
You can't
thought?
have a free lane.
Okay.
I think the guardrails.
Well, I'm sorry. I was going to go to Sarah, then I'll
sorry.
come back.
Sarah.
I raised my hand.
Oh,
Okay,
I'm
sorry.
sorry. Okay,
I think- I mean,
raising our hands not.
It's okay. It's fine. Mhm.
It's just a good way to communicate, for the board to communicate the community vision to the superintendent. So the superintendent, here are your goals, and then it narrows it, but these are the guardrails. Because what you don't want to happen is the superintendent, they do this, and then we have to have a meeting. No, we didn't mean that. No, you can't do that. You went, so it just helps focus, and it'll prevent a lot of back and forth if you just keep hear the goals, but narrow it to here.
Mhm.
Don't go out of the, cut
And-
the lines.
Carol, you were going to speak. What do you think a benefit would be to the superintendent for the board to provide guardrails to the superintendent?
Well, I was thinking of it in terms of, this new board is going to have to hire a new superintendent or continue whatever. And so if you have the guardrails in place, you're setting up the expectations. And the hiring of a superintendent, if we have a guardrail that says, we don't want you privatizing our public schools, then we won't have a superintendent who's going behind the scenes and making deals that we as a community don't want to have happen. So I think that the guardrails in place will be really important in the hiring of superintendent, to find a superintendent that matches the values and expectations of the community.
Mm-hmm. So I use example, and some of you all may have heard some of this if you've attended some of the other meetings of a guardrail. So I have an older brother, and like little boys often are, when we were given opportunities by our parents to do some things, we may go off and do some things. But what we did know from sitting at the kitchen table with our parents, we knew what the values were of the family, what their expectations were of us. But there would be times when, I just use my mother in particular, she just wanted us to get out the house. For whatever the reason was a peace of mind or things she wanted to get done, she wanted that, or she just wanted us to go out and get exercise. She wanted us to go outside and play. But she also would put a guardrail on us. So she would say, you can't leave the yard, for example, Or if we got more freedom than that, she could say you could go anywhere you wanted in the neighborhood, but you had to be home by 6 o'clock or when they put the floodlights on at the house. But what she did by doing that was she gave us freedom. So as long as we either stayed in the yard or as long as we were back home by a certain time, she gave us the freedom to make decisions for what we were going to do. And so the guardrail also provides that opportunity for you as Board of Trustees in collaboration with the superintendent to say, you can go off and accomplish raising reading scores, but you can't do this. And so that is, to me, an opportunity for the board to represent those values that you just described. And it also frees up the superintendent to say, hey, I can go. They've hired me as this educational expert. I have a team of people that are working for me. I can go off and get done what they've asked me to get done without having to come back every minute and say, can I do this, Mother, may I? So it gives the superintendent administration the freedom and flexibility to go off and do what you hired him or her to do. And it also gives the board representing the values of the community to say, yes, you can do all that, but you shall not do this. Yes.
So you gave this big, broad statement of raising reading scores, and then you said you can't do this. Give me an example based upon your experience. You can't do this?
So I'm going to bring up some examples.
Right, good job.
So perfect. So who would like to read? Maybe you can go forward and read the first bullet for us as an example of a guardrail.
Do not allow the number or percentage of students in low-performing campuses to increase or remain the same. How's that a guardrail?
How's that? What does that mean to you?
Do not allow the number or percentage of students in low-performing campuses to increase or remain the same.
So talking about moving students around, like bringing in,
What's
taking the low-performing students and moving them somewhere else, or bringing in, does it have to do with student movement?
What do you think the value is in that guardrail? What do you think the value is that guardrail is trying to achieve?
Make them work.
To get rid of low-performing
So-
campuses.
So let's go back. There was a conversation that you all were having earlier about quality teachers. All right. So this says, do not allow the percentage of students in low-performing campuses to increase or remain the same. Do not allow the number of or percentage of students in low-performing campuses to increase or remain the same. What is that ultimately saying?
And
Says
give
you-
them power to hire and fire teachers.
It says you want the number of students in low-performing schools to decrease. So you want low-performing schools to become high-performing schools.
Correct. So, but it's written in a negative language, so it gives a certain amount of freedom, but it also articulates a value. Cindy, did you want to? Oh, go ahead, Ben. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think to that point, and to your example,
Mhm.
is it's not a directive. It's not telling you to move students out of the school or change attendance boundaries. A superintendent could interpret that and say, we need to do that. That's a whole nother conversation, but that's not what this is saying. It could mean, maybe for these low-performing schools, because the board has said they don't want to continue to see the same amount or more kids in these, I need to do something different with teachers. You're right. What we see here in our lowest performing schools is we've got a lot of first-year teachers. So maybe I need to think differently about our human capital strategy and how do I get more effective teachers into those schools. So the superintendent has a number of different options to do this, and the board is giving the freedom to do this. But we're saying don't allow and continue to allow the same amount of kids or more kids to be in these low performing schools.
Just real quick before
question.
you go on, I want to point you, and it's the exact same thing. It's one thing that we overlooked, or at least I didn't hear it. You see it on both the vision and goals page And page 3 is the values and guardrails page. It's in that green column. You'll see it at the bottom of the green column in
yes.
both of those. Can somebody read it on goals? The last thing in the green column?
The guardrails, interim guardrails, or theories of action will challenge the organization and require change in adult behaviors.
Yep, so that was on the guardrails page. Now can somebody read it on the page 2? The goals page?
Goals on the pre-section, the previous page. No, go ahead. You're fine.
Goals and interim goals will challenge the organization and will require change in adult behaviors. So guardrails allow us to take these student outcome goals and start to make it actionable on adult actions. Or
Yeah,
how
so
we
both
interpret
of,
adult
both of them, we want both of those, the goals to be set in such a way that they require adult behavior change to be achieved, and the guardrails to be honored. They also require adult behavior change. And you'll notice that in possibly in some of these guardrails, which are examples from other communities and might not be pertain to yours, but these are just examples. Because why do you think we would want these goals and guardrails to require adult behavior change?
You don't want the board micromanaging the superintendent. You want the superintendent to be empowered to do their job in a way that their vision allows success. You don't want the board to set up specific ways that they think success is reached.
Yeah, so that's definitely a benefit of having a guardrail. But why would either of these policy statements, why would we want them to cause adult behavior change to be either honored or achieved? Just in general, not any of these in specific. Adult behavior change. Does anybody, what's the definition of insanity?
Doing the same thing over and over and expecting different
the same
results.
Okay, so there.
Right.
Yeah, I'm just for the sake of time, let's do
Yeah.
one more here as an example. Let's go to the 4th bullet. Thomas, can you read the 4th bullet for us?
Do not allow teachers or principals in the bottom 2 qualities.
Quartiles.
Of performance to serve on low performing campuses.
So what value do you think that guardrail is referencing? Do not allow teachers or principals in the bottom 2 quartiles of performance to serve in low performing campuses.
Number of things on where we want our students learning and how we need to change actions at low performing campuses, how we measure performance of teachers and how we reinforce that and provide training or other sort of matters to it, and how you change adult behaviors on educating students in those campuses.
I'm gonna challenge you following the guardrail. I'm gonna challenge you a little more. What value do you think it's really getting to if you're not allowing teachers or principals, if you have a evaluation system and you have teachers or principals who are in the bottom 2 quartiles of performance serving in your lowest performing campuses? What is that trying to get to, Jen?
I think the point is to put your most valuable resources where they're needed most, as opposed, I think that's.
Based on
Tom.
what timeline?
I'm sorry?
Based on what timeline for number 4?
Well, again, you would have in as part of this work, you would have set goals. If you remember, there was when Ben was discussing goals, and a goal was up there about teacher quality. And Thomas, you raised the concern about the fact that you had turnovers in schools and principals leaving and teachers leaving and so forth. This guardrail could be used as another way of trying to say that when we have some of our most challenging schools or have students who are in some of our low performing campuses, this guardrail could be one way of saying to the superintendent, don't, I won't say that don't do it, but avoid allowing less quality, if you will, of individuals to be concentrated in the schools that have the greatest academic need. So this is another way that a guardrail can be used to accomplish something without the board providing a directive to the superintendent. And just on that point, because I'm gonna go to some examples of non-guard. Oh,
Just
go ahead,
real
Cindy.
quick, because I
Okay.
think his question was in what amount of time.
Okay.
So go ahead and look on values and guardrails. The second to last item on page 3 in the green column, meeting student outcomes focus.
Which one did you say?
On page 3, the second to last item on meeting student outcomes focus.
Yes.
All board guardrails last from 3 to 5 years. And then it goes on to say all interim guardrails last from 1 to 3 years. So these things will also have those interim measures developed and adopted by the superintendent in collaboration with the board that will allow the board to progress monitor on those. We won't be able to get really deep into that, but so these are guardrails are last 3 to 5 years, same as goals.
Can I just give a clear example of like that last one? So if the board says, this is the value we're protecting, we want to make sure our most effective teachers are in front of kids who need them the most. So the superintendent reads that and says, all right, we got to do some things to make sure that we're achieving that. Just like goals, and it's in here as well about interim guardrails, the superintendent then adopts, in collaboration with the board, interim guardrails. So something might be, we're going to look at the retention rate of teachers, our most effective teachers in our lowest performing schools, year over year. And we should be able to see that we are increasing the retention rate of these teachers. And that's what's going to come back and be monitored. So that would be an interim guardrail. In the middle of the year, we're going to look at how many vacancies there are. At the end of the year, we might look at what the retention rate of our most effective teachers is. And over the coming 1 to 3 years, we should see those improving, because those are what help me make these tangible about what this looks like and how I'm doing this and accomplishing this.
But with this kind of guardrail, I mean, would you have things in place that say, well, as a district, we should be providing professional development for them? Because, I mean, the reality that I see, if we adopted that one, it would really create a lot of and so how do you work? I mean, the reality of it is our teachers choose where they want to be in the schools. They apply for these jobs, and the newest teachers and newest principals often go to these situations, and they're
Just
not
real quick,
supported.
none
So
of these
how-
are what we're telling you to
Exactly.
adopt.
Yeah, I
That's
know,
what
but
I'm
I'm
saying.
saying, how would you?
It may not
how do you take
fit
a
your
guardrail
situation.
And so it doesn't
Right.
create a.
But it may not. That's why I
Yeah.
mentioned earlier. These are examples.
Well, I know they're examples,
And
but the
it-
reality is,
it may
how
not-
do you create a guardrail that doesn't upset your
Right.
community, but works on supporting
So-
your system?
So we spent most of the day talking about improving student outcomes, and we said that the purpose of the school division is to improve student outcomes. It doesn't say that the purpose of the school division is to make every adult happy, and so there is a distinction. And so again, these are just examples. They are school divisions, school districts that adopt these, and they work well for them. There are others that may not adopt any of these because that may not be what the value is that they have heard from the community, and the board is there to represent the vision and values of the community. So let me go to some non-examples, and I'll come back later and see if there's some additional questions.
It's still, these guardrails, you're anticipating are gonna take a couple months to develop. This is not something that's gonna happen.
It takes, again, all of this is about one of the things that we may have, which I may not have referenced enough throughout this. You know, you will see throughout this framework collaboratively. So there's collaboration that's happening amongst the board. There's collaboration that's happening between the board and the superintendent. There's collaboration that's happening from the board to the community. So all of this is about collaboration. This is not some dictate from the Council of Great City Schools. This gives you all the opportunity in your role of bringing forward what you're hearing from the community and then collaborating amongst yourselves and with the superintendent on what makes sense for your community. So let's talk about why some of these are not examples of guardrails. Keep parents happy. Tell me about why is that not a guardrail, a properly framed guardrail?
Why we skip 1 and 2?
I just picked that one. I'll come back. But let's just start with that one. Keep parents happy. Give me some feedback on that one. We can come back to number 1.
That's an unattainable goal, and it's completely vague.
So it's vague. What does happy mean? And it's not written in the format, right? We say we write these as thou shalt nots or will nots, and so it doesn't meet the definition of how we define a guardrail, but it also, like you said, is not realistic, and so I'll leave that one alone. So let's go back. Let's go to the first one. Enroll fewer students in our low-performing campuses. Why is that not a guardrail?
Because that's impossible.
Well, never mind. Let's speak to it for a minute. What is it? If it's not a guardrail, when you read that, enroll fewer students in our low-performing campuses, how does that read? If the board says that, if the board wrote that and adopted that and gave that to the superintendent, how would that read?
Your hands are tied.
Well, it's not
But that, I
specific.
guess,
But speak to that some more. When you say your hands are tied, what do you mean?
I mean, it can't be done.
Well, it would, in essence, it's a directive.
unrealistic.
It's a directive. Even if it didn't make sense, it would be a directive. It's the board stating to the superintendent what to do. Now, let's just say for some reason the board adopted that. Who would now own that?
Superintendent.
superintendent?
Nah, why would the superintendent own it if the board directed it?
Well, he violates it.
I would argue to you that the board would own it because be accountable for it. The board
For
would
the
now be
result.
accountable
Won't be a conflict.
because the board has now, as you said, tied the hands. The board has now said to the superintendent, this is what you shall do. And if the superintendent goes out and does it and it proves to be a disaster, you can't hold the superintendent accountable for it.
Absolutely.
You now are responsible. You now own that. And so that's another important reason why it's framed and aligned the way it is. Let's just go to number 4. Do not fail to hire Mrs. Johnson. It's good that we can have some levity, but you all do know that there are board members
Oh, yeah.
who may run on a campaign that there's a particular person they want hired or a particular person that they want fired, and they may run on that. So these things are up here for real reasons. Everything in here is based upon research and experience. But again, do not fail to hire Mrs. Johnson. 1, isn't about children. 2, it's not written in the proper format. 3, is given a directive to the superintendent. And 4 is about the biggest conflict of interest you probably could have as a school board member. And I'll even add a 5th. Imagine if you were a teacher in the system, or a teacher wanting to aspire to be in the system, and this is the way the board operated. So I'm going to let me pause for a minute and see if there are any more questions about goals and guardrails and the connections between the values or what you can find in here on page 3 of the framework. Any questions about guardrails, what they represent, how they are formed, the impact that they can have on the superintendent administration, and really I would add the added power and responsibility that it places in the hands of the Board of Trustees as you are representing the values of your community. Any questions at all about guardrails?
It seems to me that the way that this system works is that you're saying the importance of the board is to govern versus manage. And you don't want to manage your superintendent. You hire your superintendent to manage the system, and the board is the vision. The board is to say these are the bigger picture issues, and now you handle the minutia, because as a board you don't, get back to the student outcomes, is you don't want to be caught up in your time with managing what the superintendent's job is. Is that, I mean, I feel like
yes,
that's
I will affirm that. And matter of fact, I mentioned earlier in this framework, as you flip through it, you will find a series of links to research. So this framework is research based, and there is a great deal of research that shows that when boards govern, focus on student outcomes, as we've talked about with goals, 1 to 5 goals, and with all the focus that we've talked about, that student outcomes improve. When boards manage, when boards are not focused on students, when we're focused on adult behaviors and adult outcomes, then we see the challenges that we have. And so, yes, boards do govern, and this framework represents, as we talked about earlier, that part of the governing and part of the monitoring and part of the focus is on student outcomes, and this gives you tools to do that, and it also gives you your own report card of how you're doing. So you can be not student outcome focused at all. You can adopt goals and still not be student outcome focused. And so that's why you see in each of these columns how you could be a board that is not student outcome focused, or how you become a board that's mastering student outcomes in each of these areas. And you could master in one area with goals, and you could still have some challenges with guardrails. And so that's part of, I think, the brilliance of the framework.
Does our current board know what percentage of time they currently spend on student outcomes?
Can I answer that one too?
Yeah.
So in this framework, there's a tool. And there's a tool where the board can go and do an evaluation, a time evaluation of meetings. You can go back and you can look at meetings, and using that tool, you can come and determine I won't say exactly, but you can determine, based upon our definitions in this framework, how much time you spend on student outcomes. So you can calculate everything from how much time you spend on the pledge, how much time you spend on comments from the public, how much time you spend discussing the budget, how much time you spend debating something, and how much time you actually spend on monitoring and on student outcome focus. And that tool will allow you to see how you score as you work towards spending no less than 50% of your time in your public meetings on student outcomes.
So what is it?
So for your board, I'm not absolutely sure, but I think what I can speak to, that it probably is likely to hover somewhere around what we find boards hovering around nationally, because that is something that there is a national effort to code school board meetings, and what we often find is that most boards spend less than 10% of their time overall talking about student outcomes and making the main thing. There is a lot of focus on adult inputs, and that's probably where, we have heard your board talk about student outcomes, however, not necessarily in relation to any measurable goal. So they have been, but one of our first parameters is part of that time spent. You actually have to have goals, student outcome goals set in order for that time to be part of that equation. Do you want to say anything?
I would just add from personal experience, I have been a teacher, a principal, and an assistant superintendent in a system that moved from not focusing on student outcomes to one that did and went through this process. And I can tell you, before, our board is like most boards in America. And you can imagine what they talked about. They talk about curriculum or the professional development, or there's an issue at this school, or the SPED classroom over there does not have air conditioning or whatnot. When those conversations were happening, you can guess what I spent all my time on the next day. I got to go find out why that classroom is X, Y, and Z, all these type of issues. When the board transitioned to having goals on, and we care mostly, and I think that was the highest priority, reading. And here's the way we're going to measure it. You can guess what I spent my time on after that, reading, and everyone else did. And that is at the heart of being clear about these governance practices.
Yeah, and so one of the other things that I just wanted to mention as well, so we talk about empowering and trusting the superintendent to be the educational expert and to accomplish these goals within the guardrails. So we, in essence, trust the superintendent to do that, but it is not blind trust. We trust as a governing body, we trust but verify, and that's where that monitoring practice comes in. You know, are you actually making progress toward those goals? Are you honoring the guardrails through the, you know, and we know this through that evidence they bring, that monitoring report on that monitoring report schedule, that monitoring calendar. So just wanted to bring that up. So it's not blind trust. It is trust but verify. So you saw we talked about adult behavior change. And then at the beginning of this, I asked you, what are the adult behaviors? What are those behaviors that a board can engage in? What are your top 3 behaviors that you think a board can engage in that actually set the context to improving student outcomes? I want you to take a look at your own list again, because what we know is that adult behavior matters. Some adult behaviors matter more than others. We have had research for the last several decades on what behaviors teachers can engage in to set the context for improving student outcomes. We've had information and research around what principals and leadership, administrative leadership can do, the behaviors that they can engage in to improve student outcomes. It's only been in the last 5 or 10 years that we've had the research around what school boards can do to be effective in as far as what behaviors they engage in improving student outcomes. And through our discussion today, the 3 board behaviors that make the greatest impact on improving student outcomes are collaboratively setting those SMART goals about what students know and should know or be able to do, collaboratively setting those non-negotiable values, the guardrails, and publicly monitoring progress relative to the vision and values. So publicly monitoring progress on those goals and guardrails. And when we talk about that research, Rodney referenced it before, on page 14 of your Student Outcomes Focused Governance Manual, there is a list of sources. I believe you might have all received a link to this electronically as well. Some of those links might be active so that you can actually click on them. Some of them are books, though, as well. So what we encourage is for you not to take our word for it, for you to go ahead and do some of that reading yourself and see what it is that you derive from that material, and let us know if you see something different, actually.
Everything's written somewhere in our packet, or?
I don't think they are, but what you can know is that this point system, if you notice, there are 6, and this might help you remember, they're not written in there, but they're referenced, because if you see on page 2, the highest number of points that a board can achieve, and that would be by getting all of the columns that are not red columns achieved, is 35 points as a self-evaluation instrument. That's on vision and goals.
So how much does each element count for?
Yeah,
To get the 35 points? I'm just curious.
so you have to get, in order to get all the points,
So there's
to get-
35 items here, or?
nope.
Oh,
Nope. So the way it works is working across the rubric If anything is true in this red column, then you're at 0. But if nothing is true in that red column and everything needs to be true in the orange column to get 10 points, to get 25 points, everything needs to be true in both the orange and the green column. To get 35 points, everything needs to be true in all 3 of these columns. So that's how it,
2 points a item?
it's not
No.
per item,
Oh.
it's per column. And so it's that, it might be a little strange, and we walk you through that when actually, we walk the board through that when they're actually doing the self-evaluation. But what I want you to notice is the highest amount of points possible, because you'll see that the highest amount of points is on the vision and goals. You can get 35 points. If you skip over to monitoring progress, you get 30 points as your max, and values and goals is 15 points. So then the other items that are in there, also important things around communication and collaboration, unity and trust, continuous improvement, those still have a correlation to improving student outcomes, just not, those are also behaviors the board can engage in to set that context. They're just not the 3 top ones. Still important at 10, 5, and 5, but those are the top 3. So just don't have to share, but I encourage you to look at that list compared to the list that you developed earlier. And this, again, I just bring it back to that's what this framework is about, is just giving a framework, I guess, to make decisions about how the board is going to operate, about the goals that you set, the priorities that are set for the school district. So we've talked about a lot in this short 3 hours, and it's really been our pleasure to be here. But as we're ending our time together today, we're just going to take a real quick second, because we are at 12:02 and we want to honor everybody's time. So we're going to not honor your time by a few minutes by keeping you just a slight bit late. One word that that you take away from your experience here today. So we're going to start to my right, unless somebody else is ready to go. How about this? Everybody gets a chance to go. Who will be first? One word about our time together today that you take away.
Enlightening.
Enlightening. Thank you.
Excellent.
Excellent. Thank you.
Hopeful,
Hopeful. Thank you.
informative,
Informative. Thank you.
Clear.
Clear. Thank you.
Fulfilling.
Fulfilling. Thank you.
Accountable.
Accountable. Thank you. So we do have another handout to send with you, which you also might have received electronically, and it kind of gives a summary of a lot of the points we went through today. I also am providing my email. If Rodney and Ben want to provide theirs, I'll let them do that. I won't. But if there's any questions that you have that come up, happy to answer them. And thank you again for spending your Saturday morning here with us. We really, really appreciate it, and thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.